Guten Abend, herzlich willkommen. Wir freuen uns so, dass dieser Abend heute stattfindet mit so tollen Gästen und Beteiligten. Ein Abend, der Meilenstein-Ausstellung Kunst mit Eigensinn, die vor fast auf den Tag genau 40 Jahren hier im damaligen Zwanzgerhaus eröffnet hat. Diese Ausstellung eben den gehörigen Respekt zu erweisen, daran zu erinnern und vor allem gemeinsam darüber nachzudenken und Best Practice zu sehen, was feministisches Kuratieren heute bedeutet. Im heutigen Belvedere 21 bereiten wir auch eine feministische Ausstellung vor, eine große Ausstellung für den Herbst 2026, Feminist Futures Forever, die das ganze Haus einnehmen wird, so wie es damals 1985 die Ausstellung Kunst mit Eigensinn gemacht hat, die hieß Internationale Ausstellung aktueller Kunst von Frauen, also hat begonnen am 29. März 1985. Ja, die Kuratorinnen der bevorstehenden Ausstellung haben auch den heutigen Abend gestaltet. Christiane Perschon, Stefanie Reisinger und als Assistenzkuratorin Andrea Kopranovic. Und ganz besonders großartig ist, dass 4 Protagonistinnen der damaligen Ausstellung hier sind. Und ein ganz herzliches Willkommen und ein Dank fürs Dasein und die damaligen Erfahrungen und heutigen Eindrücke mit uns teilen geht an VALIE EXPORT, Silvia Eiblmayr, Elsa Prochaska und Monika Prischl. Vielen Dank und herzlich willkommen. Ja, Christiane und Stefanie werden dann auch die anderen Künstlerinnen des heutigen Abends begrüßen und also ein herzliches Willkommen an alle, die heute beteiligt sind und a very special welcome goes to Linsey Young. Linsey has been curating a Meilenstein exhibition at the Tate Britain in fall. It opened in fall 23. I was lucky enough to see it there in early 24, Women in Revolt. Linsey, I read online that 700 women have been involved or presented in this show. I guess it's because a lot of collectives were in it, but you will tell us about Women in Revolt later tonight, and thank you for making the way and being here with us tonight. Ich glaube, die Frage nach dem feministischen Kuratieren ist heute wichtiger denn je. Abgesehen davon, wir wissen es alle und man möchte es gar nicht noch einmal wiederholen, aber wir sind gewärtig, wie sehr Frauenrechte ausradiert werden, gecancelt werden. Wir sind in einem wirklich, wirklich brisanten Moment in der Geschichte, aber gleichzeitig sehen wir, dass wieder neue Communities entstehen, wieder neue Kräfte sich sammeln, frische, alte Kräfte mit neuen Kräften und darum sind und bleiben wir optimistisch und wie wir das machen wollen, das werden wir heute Abend besprechen, ein Stück weit und ich darf jetzt dich bitten, Christiane Perschon und dann Stefanie Reisinger.
Why are we doing this? Because it's March, it's Women's Month, because equality for women has not yet been achieved, from unequal pay to an increase of femicides to the right to physical self-determination, which is being questioned again today when we look at the issue of abortion, for example, or the unpaid care workload that weighs predominantly on the shoulders of women. So with International Women's Day on 8th of March, and not only, hopefully, feminist art practice and the visibility of women artists are in focus of the program during Women's Month in March. We were doing research on this iconic exhibition, Kunst mit Eigensinn, Internationale Kunst von Frauen. that was opened on 29th March 40 years ago here at the Belvedere 21. At that time, it was the Museum of the 20th Century, co-curated by VALIE EXPORT and Silvia Eiblmayr, together with Heidi Grundmann, Katrin Bichler, and Monika Brischel. And the groundbreaking exhibition architecture was designed by Elsa Prochaska, and I'm very honored that all of them followed our invitation and are present tonight. As well are present some of the artists who took part in the exhibition. So please give a very warm applause, frenetic applause for the organizers. So I hand over now to colleague Stefanie Reisinger, who will give an overview of tonight's schedule and the film program that we prepared for you.
Thanks for being here. We just didn't only want to talk about art and why and how we exhibit and curate and discuss all the art, but also really wanted to see some of the great works that inspire what we do and why we do it. This is not only to play a kind of or pay tribute to their program, but it's also very important to show kind of the ongoing importance of feminist art film. And I have to point out, not only as a documentation of performance, but as an independent and deliberate art form. And I'm just gonna walk you quickly through what the narration was or is behind what we thought. So we begin in the private sphere at home, there in the supposedly designated space for women, in the kitchen with Martha Rosler. We question the assigned role of the woman in the kitchen with humor, but also anger. And then we break free into the public with VALIE expert Syntagma, deconstructing traditional representation of women in art and the media by cutting up the female body in different image sections and then reassembling them. We then go to work with Ashley Hans-Scheyerl and Ursula Bührer, Maria meistert Metall und Anna arbeitet anständig, and sarcastically not only question gender roles at work, or better put to work really, but also question gender roles per se. We then continue in the second screening program. We play sports with Dorit Margreiter in a rather male-dominated space and in a confrontational sporting situation. And then we rediscover joyful pleasure with Daniela Zahlner, who walks us through film history, or better, Austrian porn film history, and humorously unveils the role of women played in them and updates the showcase of lust for us. And then we continue to go back home. We domesticate men and control their sexuality with Kozyra's Lou Salomon. And also, spoiler alert, to those who don't know the film, we have a clear reference to VALIE's legendary performances there. And last but not least, with Christiana Perschon, we basically jerk off on the camera lens. So long connotated with a male gaze, showcasing the complexity within being an artist and a working mother. So that's the narration. It's kind of the complexity of, it kind of is an introduction to quite a lot of different topics that concern us, working around and with feminist strategies. I'm really excited for it. I'm going to stop here. I want to say a warm welcome to the filmmakers who are here as well. So again, VALIE Export, Ashley Hans-Scheyerl, Dorit Margreiter, Daniela Zahlner, and Christiana Perschon.
So Silvia Eiblmayr, was a co-curator of the Kunst mit Eigen-Sinn show, about which she will talk now and present to you. She's an art historian, curator, and author. She was the director of the Salzburger Kunstverein and of the Galerie im Taxispalais in Innsbruck from 1998 to 2008. And in 2009, together with VALIE Export, you curated the Austrian Pavilion at the 53rd Venice Biennial. Silvia will talk to us about the exhibition, and I give the floor to you.
You have here all the people involved in this show, because it's important to have the single tasks that we had done. Unfortunately, Katrin Pichler is not with us anymore. She was she made the concept for the catalog and the symposium. Elsa Prohaska, she's here, and I will talk then about a little bit about the architecture. And Heidi Grundmann, as Christiana has mentioned, could not come. She lives in Vienna, and she did a really large and great program for the video for this exhibition. VALIE Export and I curated the visual show in the exhibition spaces, and VALIE alone the film program. And Monika Prischl and I, we were the organizers, the two of us together. We worked in the Museum of Modern Art in the Palais Liechtenstein. We had our office there. But we have to say that the museum did not support us. The museum was kind of forced to do the show due to then newly elected or say installed Secretary of State for Women, Johanna Donal, a legendary Austrian politician, a real feminist. First, I will talk about the architecture, because what you can see here is a sort of not orthogonal structure that was built in the building here, and sort of streets or lanes and places. This was Elsa Prohaska's idea, and it worked perfectly, because a lot of those works then in the 80s were installations. And this was rather new compared to this really important show that VALIE Export did in 1975, exactly 10 years earlier, in the Galerie Next St. Stephan. She was the one who did the first international show for women artists, but not only artists. It was called Magna Feminism, Art and Creativity. It comprised also literature, music, and discourse, philosophy all together. So this is an interesting, an important thing to mention, how art has developed, be it by men or be it by women, within these 10 years. It has expanded, new strategies, new forms of presentations, and so on. The show hadn't that much money, and Elsa Prohaska was forced, or we were forced altogether, to use the movable walls that you can see here. And Elsa used the walls, but in her way. And this is broke with the old system that was usually used in this building from its beginning, from the early 60s, as a museum. The intervention into the building, that was something, and now I speak also of patriarchy. This was hated by the staff here. They hated it. The German artists coming here and painting on the walls. So it was meant as an intervention, and it really worked as an intervention, also in terms of a symbolic and even political, you could say, a gender-specific way. This is just to give you again a view into the building, into the installation. What you can see here on the right is a curved wall made of bricks, this idea of Elsa Prohaska, and inviting an Austrian artist, Johanna Kandel, to make a mural on this wall. This wall was meant as a separation to the part of the exhibitions, because on the other side, on the concave side, was a smaller place for performances and lectures. And now just views of the opening. It was full, it was crowded, and it was even more crowded when we did the symposium. again, Johanna Kandel's mural, really great, creating another space, an illusion of a garden somewhere behind a wall. I start here to speak just a little bit about the concept. It was a VALIE Export's idea, always developed in the 70s as a consequence of the show that she had done in Galerie St. Stephan, Magna. And it took 10 years until this was politically possible due to this politician Donal I have mentioned. Eigen-Sinn, the title, is related to Oskar Negd and Alexander Kluge's book, History and Obstinacy, Geschichte und Eigensinn. So it has a reference to a German leftist discourse about emancipation of the subject, you could say, in a larger sense. But Eigensinn is a play with words. Eigensinn written with a hyphen, because it means, on one hand, obstinacy, stubbornness. On the other hand, sense, it's of course the sense and senses and so on. From the very beginning onwards, we knew we did not want to repeat the feminist works from the 70s, to speak about what are the issues, what are the strategies, what are the ideas of artists now. That meant that a younger generation of artists, such as Cindy Sherman or Rosemarie Trockel or Barbara Kruger or Jenny Holzer, to find out what are they doing now. But this didn't mean that the older generations weren't included as well, but it was mainly then also from the first generation, you could say, mainly works from the 80s, not so much from the 70s. Painting was then really important, as you can see in the catalog. I will not show so much of the painting now. But of course, what you can see as well, body-related works were really important. Body politics were, of course, an issue as much as in the 70s, in the 80s. But there was this new conceptualism, new discourses, post-structural approaches, media theory mainly. VALIE was a forerunner for the media theory. Media reflective works, such as, I could say, Barbara Bloom, or again Sherman, or Barbara Kruger, and so on. There were a couple of works dealing with really social issues, urban planning, trade unions. So the scope was really big. As well, video, the first digital tools, video, Darrell Birnbaum, Gretchen Bender, or also Inge Graf, Austrian artists, they were then already dealing with digital media and the possibilities they could find there. It was an international show, as you know, from the US to Japan, also included, as much as that was possible, artists from the so-called Ostbloc, from Poland, from Czechoslovakia then, from Yugoslavia then, and Hungary, of course. So we did as much as we could. The selection was made. We asked artists to send their files, and then we got lots of offers. And from those offers, from those files that artists had sent to us, we made the selection. Of course, it always was subjective. Of course, you could say afterwards we should not have missed that one or that one, but this is how it works. But on those years, it was, of course, really critical, because if you do a show for women, then every woman then was, of course, expected to be in the show. So the show was large, as you see, but we did it as good as we could. And that was maybe also the point of criticism. One part criticized us altogether, doing such a project as Women, Why? In a museum, why? Why women? We got the most scathing review from the largest German magazine, Der Spiegel, whose the author, male, of course, asked or had the headline, waiting for a Josephine Beuys. Another question was, why didn't we look for a feminine aesthetics? This was also a really important issue from the late 70s or 70s onwards. That's something we didn't want to. We did not have the intention. This was not the political idea of this exhibition. The political idea was, at first, to conquer a public institution, to demand from the state of Austria to allow women to show in this museum, which had been given to men, to 85 men altogether, and was only Maria Lasnik in a year before who had her first solo show in this building here. This is Johanna Donal, the opening, and our Minister for Culture, Ernst Fischer, who, as most of you will know, who was then for a longer time the president of Austria. And I'll just give you an insight. Work by Maria Magdalena Jetelova, then Czechoslovakia, then she went to Germany. She was teaching in Germany. So a piece where nobody could say, that's feminine aesthetic, or that's done by a woman. This was this kind of, in those years, it was something where people were stunned to see that. So I'm sorry, I'm stumbling a little with my words, but the idea was also to bring people together, to invite them, to bring information to the audiences or to the public, something that was not self-understanding. In the 80s, there was no internet, there was no fax, there was not even no fax. We had telephone and we had postal mail, that was all. And so the networks existed, but very small ones. So you had really, we did large work of say, bringing information together, collecting information, and so on. Jenny Holzer, Barbara Blum. She was then Dutch. It's only later that she emigrated to New York, or that she became an American artist. Just some. VALIE Export was in this show only with this single work. Lea Lublin. Maybe you recognize now, you have found out that a lot of those artists who were not known or hardly known here later became really recognized in their importance and understood what they had done already in their different careers and in their artistic life. Eva Maria Schön, a German artist living in Berlin, and you see this installation, the walls that facing each other in this kind of corridor, and the idea was that each visitor could choose a face. There was a lamp producing the shadow, and so you could choose the different faces that she had hung there, sketched there on the wall. Japanese artist Kaoru Hirabayashi, what she presented, what maybe it's better known now, then we didn't know there are two different alphabets in Japan, a female and a male one. She brought them together here. Miriam Khan had a huge installation, a whole space. And as I mentioned, painting was but also drawing. Rosemarie Trockel, then very young, in 85, not known in Austria, hardly known in Austria. I show those works also because you remember the stairs, those who have never seen this pavilion with the stairs that were leading in this kind of generous way to the first floor. Helen Chadwick, with really a great piece from 82 to 84. And I give you just images. These are 2 pages from the Austrian magazine Profil. One is in black and white, one is in color. So the reviews were mixed. There were good ones and there were scathing ones, as it had to be expected for a project like that in 40 years ago. Altogether, it was a success. It was a success also in terms of audience. It was the largest, best visited exhibition in the 80s. Just to give you an impression of the dimension of the program. And so films were shown in this space here. Video was mainly shown in this space here. Performances was an important part. So there were these 7 artists invited. One who could unfortunately not come was Adrienne Piper, but she would also have been, of course, a really important figure within this project. You see now the wall that I have talked about from the concave side of the wall and the video presentation, Stina Vasulka, important Icelandic-American video artist. And this is finished with this, and I'm afraid I left out a lot. I could have talked much more, but I think the time is over anyway. The last performance was done by Rose English, who has now a large show at the Museum of Modern Art on the Mönchsberg in Salzburg. And just to give you an impression, the audience and her wonderful theatrical piece, funny. And this is with our translator, Camilla Nielsen, whose voice you have also heard in VALIE Export's Syntagma film, the American voice, that's her. So, and I end again with this wall painting and the museum's corner that we are in now. Thank you.
Linsey Young, a renowned curator and researcher in contemporary British and feminist art. She worked from 2016 to 2023 at Tate Britain in London. You've been curator of Turner Prize for several editions, 2016, 18, 19, this year. And you've also created the Scottish Pavilion together with Jarlath Brogger, or for Jarlath Brogger, for the 58th Venice Biennial. Prior to this, you worked at the Scottish National Gallery and at the British Council for several years. And since September 24, you were also a PhD candidate at the Royal College of Art in London, focusing on women artists working within the context, of second wave feminism in United Kingdom. So Linsey is going to speak to us tonight about her own exhibition, Women in Remote, a touring exhibition that opened at Tate Britain in 23 and is now on its third stop in Manchester at the Whitworth. So really, really excited you're here tonight. A warm welcome.
Sorry, I kind of cornered you there. Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor to follow that presentation and the kind of amazing feminist work that's been so important to my work and the work of my generation of curators. And also so exciting to know that the show is going to be kind of rebooted next year. So, I'm going to talk to you about Women in Revolt. So I worked at Tate for about 9 years. I'm sure many people know this, but when you work in a big organization, you normally get given projects. It's very rare that you get one of your own. And this was my one shot. So this was my kind of baby exhibition. It was the first of its kind in the UK. So it was a major exhibition in a mainstream institution. That's really important. I don't ever want to seem like I discovered things or we discovered things. This work was always there. It's just the mainstream institutions weren't looking at it. They weren't paying attention. And it very specifically looked at British art practice. So I was almost too intimidated by the scope of the international and wanted to hone down on the place I was from, and more on that in a minute. And really important for me was that the show, it's intersectional. It very much has a socialist perspective, a working class socialist perspective, and is also trans-inclusive, which has been controversial, but that's what I did. And yeah, it's a touring exhibition, and that was also a strategy. My institution similarly did not want to do this show, and having touring partners early on, who also happened to be feminist colleagues that I knew from other institutions, really helped to stabilize and make sure that the show stayed in the program and was really embedded in the planning of the organization. So there are three reasons why I wanted to make the exhibition. And the first is very much about the personal being the political. So I wanted to make a present for my mum. So my mum died in 2020, about almost 5 years ago exactly. And she wasn't involved in the art world at all. She was a nurse. She was a single mum. She was a socialist. She'd had a chronic illness. She worked as an unpaid carer for her partner. And she had really bad taste in men. I think the kind of taste in men that only women born in the mid-50s can have. I say that with love. But she had some quite disastrous relationships that impacted upon her life. And more seriously, she was a waspy woman, which is a thing in the UK where the government decided to change women's pension age, giving basically no notice. So it meant that women who worked their whole lives, saved for their pensions, the date moved by 5 years. So essentially my mum died before she got her pension, despite working for the NHS her entire life. There's still a campaign about this going on in the UK, but the government isn't interested. So I have and had a huge amount of rage about the kind of injustices that face ordinary women. And I think, so I'm an only child as well, so I think when you grow up the only child of a single mum and you see these queens, just like these queens who are her friends, my mother, this whole group of people that raise you, they are the people who run the world. And then you go to work and men try to tell you what to do. And it astonished me. I just couldn't believe that in a professional environment, men thought they had anything to tell me. And when I got to the Tate, I realized how patriarchal it was. I'm Scottish, and I think it's a particularly English place. It's very kind of class-ridden. There are lots of amazing things about it, but it is built on a kind of patriarchal colonial history, right? That's what the institution is. And I realized that through the collection, I couldn't tell the stories I wanted to tell. I couldn't tell stories about women, about queer people, or I could tell a very, very limited story. So I wanted to learn more about and be able to reflect the society and community I'd grown up in and I lived in. And what's the other reason? Yes, that I was called curator of British contemporary art, or British art, and I realized I didn't know about British art. I knew about men's British art, and I knew about white men's British art, because that's what I'd been taught at university and in my undergraduate and my master's, and I just had enough. I think, dealing with my mum's illness, and I was just like, I'm done. I only want to look at women's art. So I pitched the exhibition in 2017, and at that time, a very, very senior male colleague said, feminism's boring. Why would we do that show? And my brilliant female boss said, just grit your teeth and keep going. Keep going with this idea, keep building it, keep plotting it. And so I thought, okay, they'll listen to statistics. So I went into the archive and I worked out how many shows had been made between, I think it was 1970 and I think I did 1970 to 1985. And I worked out that at Tate, there had been, I think it's in the book, it's correct, but off the top of my head, 371 presentations, exhibitions, displays had taken place at Tate. 11 had included women, and 1 had been a solo presentation by a woman. And when I presented that to my boss, to his credit, he said, okay, fine, you can make this show. So I worked on my own for quite a long time, and then with an amazing assistant curator called Susanna Flaskova, and then with one called Hannah Marsh, and another woman called Inga Fraser. But initially, it was kind of me and a notepad. And I started, I'm a very talkative person. So I thought, okay, the way to start this is to go and see an artist and start to talk to them. So I went to Margaret Harrison. It was really important to me that I meet as many of these women as possible, or their children, or their estates, their partners, because I really felt that, especially coming from a mainstream institution, I needed to build trust. Why should they do this? The institutions ignored them for 40 years. Why should they come in now? Another interesting fact is that the institution didn't want to fund my travel. So I said, oh, I'm going to need to travel around the country, not to like Hawaii or New York, but like I need to go to Birmingham and I need to go to Sheffield. And there was this tiny amount of money to travel. And I said, no, like this is so important that I meet these women face to face, that I talk to them, that I explain the process. But they wouldn't budge. So I ended up getting a significant amount of travel money from an external funder. And that happened a lot through the show. Other people would help where the institution couldn't, facilitate a more nuanced way of working than just simply working with one living artist or picking things out of the collection. So in the end, it was the largest show ever to be shown at Tate. Tate Britain, certainly. I'm not sure about Tate Modern. And it had about 120 artists. I still can't really count because lots of them are collectives and people dropped in and out, or they kind of argued about who was in it, but about 120. And it featured about 350 artworks and about 350 pieces of archive. Really important to note, 11 artworks came from the collection, and no archive came from Tate's collection because it didn't hold suitable archive. So I worked, which is embarrassing. It does now. Tate has recently got the deposit of a few really extraordinary archives, feminist archives, which changed the landscape. But at that point, even a handful of years ago, it wasn't there. So paid advisors, I brought them in 2 years early so that I could really listen to what they said and respond to it. And they were Marlene Smith on the left, artist, curator, writer, Althea Greenan, who runs the Women's Library at Goldsmiths, and Griselda Pollock. And as well as really needing their expertise and their support and their criticism, which I got in droves, it was also another strategy, because I knew that my colleagues at Tate could say no to me, but they couldn't say no to these ladies. So if we both agreed on something, then they would go forward and say, actually, no, we agree with the curator, we want to do this. So it was about learning and about support, but also a kind of tactical strategy. And I should also say as well, one of the really key things was having access to the archives of the women who've done this work before. So having the Black Cultural Archive, Feminist Library, Glasgow Women's Library, a whole host of people up and down the country who incredibly generously opened up their archives that they had been safeguarding for decades. In terms of the work, much of it was found in cupboards, in sheds, under beds, or in small regional collections, which in the UK were really ahead of the curve in terms of collecting feminist work. But honestly, the vast majority hadn't been shown for a very, very long time. So we really had to think about budget, and I wanted to think about budget in a feminist way. So rather than spending it on big shiny things, I wanted to spend it on stuff that was useful for women. So we spent a significant amount of money framing work, conserving work, meaning that when the show comes down in June, it can go back to them and they can have it, they can use it, they can sell it, they can do, what they need to. We credited other women's work up front as much as we could. And I also brought in people where I didn't have the expertise. So I'm not particularly knowledgeable in film and video. So we brought in an amazing woman called Lucy Reynolds, who curated the film program. And things like that happened at lots of different points. A key kind of theme going through it was that we were looking at constellations and not stars, which is a quote I nicked from a brilliant feminist writer-curator, Irene Revel. And that was really important to me because I was getting really sick of this thing that the art world does, that institutions do, about kind of fame and singularity. And I wanted to show the networks, the the care, the arguments, all the kind of messiness of people kind of working together. So I was quite often asked by the press team, but who are the famous people? And it's like, well, there aren't any, well, there are some, but there weren't many because we didn't make them famous. We ignored them for 40 years. So, you know, yeah, that's the problem. We also really foregrounded the complicity of the institution. So I worked with this amazing interpretation curator called Sam Maguire, who's a kind of union activist. Well, we both were, but she was much better than me at the Tate. And she's an expert at pushing kind of institutional language as far as it can go. So we managed to have, I think, quite an aggressively left message in an institution that is politically neutral because it's state-funded. And we talked very openly in the text panels about how the Tate had not collected this work and, you know, the reasons why that had been. I also tried not to box women in. So I wanted, and an example of that is like, the band The Raincoats. There's a woman in The Raincoats called Gina Birch, who is an artist and a musician. And I think when people heard she was in the show, they thought she would be in the punk room that I had. But actually, I put her in the domestic space. And I did that a few times with people like Cozy Fanny Tutti, again, kind of punk musician. I put her in a performance context as like body art performance context as well, because I didn't want them to be pigeonholed. I also, even though we had no space, repeated women sometimes because it felt important to show the complexity of their practice within the space that we had. I also worked really hard with my team to foreground women's voices and views. So I think this is true. No one's disagreed with me yet, but there is no male gaze in Women in Revolt. So even the documentary photography in the vitrines is taken by women. So women from commercial feminist photography agencies or by artists who were in the show themselves. And that was, for me, about creating a kind of safe space for my female audience, or my audience of women, because that's what I imagined. And I remember being questioned on that at one of our team meetings at Tate, and they said, oh, but who is this exhibit? What's the target audience? And someone said, oh, it's 16 to 25 and something else. And I said, no, it's not. I'm making this show for women between the ages of 60 and 110. And if anyone else likes it, that's brilliant, but I am making it for those women. And then they asked me, but what about men? And I was like, I really don't care. And they were genuinely shocked. That's still, I mean, of course, I'm happy they came and they enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that we foregrounded. Okay, so the show, we took up as much space as we could. We had the biggest set of galleries at Tate Britain, which is the downstairs galleries, the Linburys. We had 6 rooms. And we made an installation outside. So Bobby Baker, who made this work in 1976 initially, it's called An Edible Family in a Mobile Home, and I'd only ever seen it in black and white pictures. And I wanted to bring it back to life. And I don't know how she did it, but Bobby built a team and actually separately managed to get funding and rebuilt this work. So essentially, it's the house, a prefab post-war house that she lived in 76. And one morning in 76, she said, oh, you know, what should I do with this? So she covered all the walls in wallpaper, in a newspaper. She made her family out of cake, and that's a daughter made of meringues. And then you'll see all the advertising of women, she's kind of iced over the top of it. And then she invites people to come in and she serves you the family. So you eat the whole family, and then once they're gone, this figure in the back, this mother figure, gets rolled out every day, and her boobs kind of open, and there are biscuits inside. So even after total destruction, the mother has to keep providing and keep. This is a flag by Rose Fink-Kelsey. We made a book, which is really important to me because I knew that would be the thing that would last forever, right, with your book as well. This is some of our film program. We brought in a lot of artists. There's Pratibha Parmar, Labena Hamid, Cozy Fanny Tutti, Jill Westwood. And we made a separate film publication as well so that becomes archive. Because doing a project like this, you realize how important archive is because people women's work is so devalued that this stuff becomes lost, and we wanted to make it physical again. We have performance. This is a naked art history lesson by the neo-naturists in the heart of Tate Britain. And I made a podcast, and this was really, really important to me because for me it was about access. So before my mum died, she was living with a chronic illness in quite a remote place in Scotland, and she hadn't been to the Tate. She hadn't seen the work that I'd done at Tate ever. And I wanted it to be available to women who can't, for financial reasons, for physical reasons, emotional, whatever. If you can't get to the institution, I want the institution to be coming to you. Again, the Tate said, and I'm being very mean, it is a wonderful place, but they said they could fund one episode, and I was like, what use is that one episode to me? So I was trying to find funding, and then I had lunch with Lubena Hamid, because I met a lot of these artists again and again, and Lubena is an incredible curator, of course, as well as being an artist, and I was kind of asking her for advice. And at the end of the conversation, she said, do you need anything? And I said, oh, well, I need £20,000 to make a podcast, but, you know, no one's going to give me that. And she wrote me a check. And she said, don't do what you think I want, do what you want. And so I worked with a feminist podcast producer, and we made this 6-part series podcast that isn't me banging on, it's the artists talking about their work and really going deep in ways that we couldn't within the institution. Made a record, because why not? Yeah, why not? Which was really amazing. Again, the Tate weren't interested, so I went through one of the artists whose friend worked for Sony, and we made this big thing. Design was super important, hitting this line between respecting the work and the artists, not fetishizing it, and also not branding it. I think institutions have a way of branding art that makes it feel like it's always been there and that they're in charge. And I wanted this show to feel unruly and like it was pushing at every seam of the institution. So that's as close as I could get to a risograph in an institution. And we used these like recycled pin boards that many of the artists would have seen in community centres where they displayed, or in NHS health centres. Promise I'm coming soon. We upgraded the suffragette colours into this kind of like chartreuse and lavender for our colour palette. And we used badges as a motif. The show unfolded over 6 rooms, one about the beginning of the movement, opening with this painting by Maureen Scott. It then went on to a room about the domestic, but about, again, about agitating the domestic. A room about punk, and kind of sex and nightlife against Thatcher coming into power. Room about Greenham Common and anti-nuclear work. 2 rooms about Black women's creativity in the UK, ending on a room about the AIDS epidemic, Section 28, and the kind of high point of Thatcherism. It was pretty successful. So the exhibition almost doubled its projected visitor figures at Tate. It was sold out most days, all through the run. It toured. The visitors, there was a huge range. I wanted to show you here this like super gorgeous intergenerational family hanging out. This is a lady who started singing Greenham Common peace songs halfway through a tour. Almost all of our film events were sold out, all of our performances. The exhibition catalogue has been reprinted 3 times and won 2 awards. About 10, it's going to be about 20 by the time we're finished, works have entered the collection from the exhibition and have also been bought by National Gallery Scotland and by Manchester. And most importantly for me, the artists had a really good time. A lot of them have been given solo shows or have been taken up with galleries. Many have had books come out about them since the show opened, or articles published, and lots have been able to reconnect with friends. And so all of that, brilliant. These are my favorite 2 reviews. An aggressively political triumph of conviction over talent, 2 stars. And Tate has mustered hundreds of works so minor and often puerile or even hate-fueled that it's extraordinary to encounter them in a museum. And I love those because they're from the 2 most right-wing papers we have in the UK. And what they show me is that the establishment is still terrified of the power of feminism and the power of women and the power of alliances and allegiances within those groups. So it shows that the work that we have all done and that you're going to do is incredibly important. Ending with a picture of two of my favorite artists, delighted to meet each other after 30 years at the opening. And that's it.
I would like to start with a question that concerns us a lot as well when we talk, and that's the question about temporality. I mean, you both mentioned what kind of timescape you chose. I mean, you said it was about the 1970s until the 1990s, so it was a deliberate looking back, whereas Silvia mentioned it was very much about the present. But I would like to know why. Like, why would you choose those particular time frames?
So I was particularly interested in working, sorry, that generation of women post-war who, it seemed to me, kept everything going, held everything up, and were completely invisible. And I kind of wanted to know why that was, and it was so particularly connected to the British political system. You know, Thatcher got her first, came to the Conservative Party in 71, was Education Minister in 74, and then becomes Prime Minister in 79, and she ruins the UK, you know, and led to everything that's kind of happening now. And so it felt important for the British context, I think, to look at that period so that we could then hopefully do the next show that is the next period. But we didn't know that history publicly, I don't think.
I think this is the greatest and most important job that you had done, because getting back to history to find out about the context, about what was the situation then, the society then. Why are these works radical? Why were they radical then and might not be radical if you do it now? This is really an important point for me in terms of curating and of the notion of feminisms. Always know about the history, know about the specific artist and where you stand. And also for the artist herself, to reflect on from which position am I talking now? Am I the person who finds everything in the internet and has everything in front of me in terms of information endless, and I can choose? This is something I find quite often. And being a feminist, and this is certainly a good intention, but it has to back itself. This intention has to be backed by knowledge and also by a sort of self-reflection in terms of artists and as well curators.
I think that's such a good point, because so I'm 43, so that kind of middle generation. So I remember some of the things that were happening in the show as a child, that we opened the first room with a panel that said, it is 1970, you can't get a mortgage on your own, there is no Race Relations Act, there's no Equal Pay Act. And young visitors were really shocked because they haven't been taught those histories. So yeah, I think it's crucial.
You talked about the critique you got for the show, but also the discussions you probably had with the feminist scene, or the different feminist scenes. As we know, there is not only one feminism, there is feminisms. And then because this is how I understood from both of you, that this moment of exchange and discourse was very important, not only in preparing the show, but also during the show was on. I mean, you showed us the schedule of the extensive video and film program. Almost every day was an event and people could come together. And also you mentioned how important it was also to create moments for people coming together and exchanging. And I would like to ask you both to say a little bit more about this.
We have to take into account, we were doing this in Austria in the 80s, and you were doing it or you have been doing it in London now, in the UK altogether. And I think this was, as I said when I presented the show, this was a real important point in terms of feminist thinking, the information and the sort of not getting stuck into a certain idea of feminism, although there were different voices anyway, also from the early 70s onwards, when feminism really became an issue. And that's what I think was, it opened something up that was new, but at the same time, it got all this criticism that I have mentioned. But still, the political impact was, emancipation, conquering the institution, kind of also challenging a public, also creating a counter, opposite audience. And that really worked in the 80s.
Everyone was so desperate for it, to be on that platform, on that scale. You know, of course, loads of people disagreed with things I've done. You know, there's been loads of criticism, which I fully welcome. I'm like, discussions were often really heated, but that's brilliant. That's what you want. You want to be critiqued by your friends and allies. And I think, if you think about the UK that those women were working in, it was kind of one where the welfare state was believed in and it was important. And we've just seen that decimated over the last 20, 30 years until we're in this like capitalist hellscape. And, it's a scary political climate in the UK. So I think that added to the sense of excitement about being with groups of women in one place.
I would like to stay on that topic or the intertwining of institutions and politics a little bit, because obviously it's different situations for everybody in different times. Whereas we live in a political time that, Christiana elaborated on that a little bit on the introduction, where kind of things tend to develop to the worse. We are lucky enough to work in an institution where the director and the chief curator very much support this idea, and we get to really work in this institution with all the spaces, almost all the spaces we've got here to develop the exhibition, and that's not a given, as you mentioned. So it's almost a bit the opposite on what Silvia then experienced with the political situation and the institution. And then I'm too little knowledgeable about the British situation, but for both of you, how would you, for Silvia, the question would be, could you elaborate a little bit more about the role of Donal and what really happened around that time? Because I think not everyone remembers or even knows it, and it's really interesting. And your situation with politics and institutions, because it almost sounds like you had no one on your side.
No, that I shouldn't say that. I did, but I don't know how to say it polite. Like there was teams of absolutely brilliant people that I worked with, but I think there was this almost like a lethargy about what it could do, almost as if the institution is, and I mean institutions at that scale, has like lost its ability to fight. And kind of, it's that thing when a major institution has to sell lots of tickets to keep the doors open because the government doesn't fund it anymore, or like strips back all its funding, then shows become more and more boring, more and more, churning out the same thing because it sells tickets. And so I think there was a real fear, and I understand that because people's jobs are at risk, a real fear that this kind of wouldn't be a success, that something about politics with no famous artists, that was messy, that was weird, would just sink a lot of money and not do anything. And I think that's what I found kind of heartbreaking during it, because I had built a team that was so excited, but I
not sure the organisation was always got it, that this could be really quite revolutionary for the institution. But they did, of course, support it and paid for it and paid my salary, and yeah, it's complicated.
What can I kind of say? One thing, there were few people who were initiators, women. But in Vienna, of course, there was a rebellious discourse, we know, and art from the 60s onwards. So there was not more than an atmosphere. There was a real art scene, male-dominated, and I must say it was mainly VALIE EXPORT who started so early to counter that in her strong way in all her fields, and also as a political person ever, and then. Of course, almost put to jail. You were not, but you were in court, and so. So it needs few people, and obviously a person like you. Then, if you take the initiatives, then you can succeed. It's as you said, there is a sort of lethargy, could be now, or a sort of affirmation for everything is good, everything, that's feminist, and that's another feminist work, and so on. And there I become very critical, because I think you have to talk about also the quality of the work, the relevance of the work, and not everything that has the tag feminism is a feminist or say a relevant work. And getting back to politics in Austria in the 80s, it was we had this Chancellor Bruno Kreisky, who was a socialist, as you might know as well, and who had the idea to create 4 female secretaries of state. And one of them was Johanna Donal, who then really turned out to be a feminist, until she then became even a minister from 1990 to 95, but then they kind of fired her. Was too much even for this. Austria then joined the EU and so on, and obviously they kind of thought we have to get rid of her. And she worked from scratch. She really knew about, she had to experience, as you talked about your mother, she had a similar, not the same, but coming from, say, lower class, and knowing what are the problems of women, be it a farmer's woman or be it, she was not an art expert, of course not, but she understood the demand, and there were, one must say, there were many women then. There were also even gallerists who had sort of also independent gallerists or partly independent gallerists who demanded that. And then she coined a sort of project that was called Brennpunkt Kunst von Frauen, which means in English sort of a fire point, or a focus. Focus is the correct translation, but it also means, in chemical terms, it means a fire point.
Amazing.
And which was to bring all the women together, women artists together in Austria. It was a huge project in different institutions, and even galleries. And ironically, and all this should take place together at one time. And we were scheduled for fall '84 in this house, but unfortunately and ironically, there was a fire. And so Kunst mit Eigen-Sinn became postponed. All the other projects happened in '84. But that was due to her, and also that the museum was forced to do this show. And they didn't like it. The director boycotted it, and they wasn't there at the opening, and it was not easy, no? It was not easy, but we did it, and maybe there's another point too. Then we did not think of self-exploitations, not at all, on the contrary, I think also Monica. But we did it, the two of us. We had one, in the end, as an assistant, sorry, from the museum, but mainly we did it, the two of us. everything. And now think of a huge exhibition of that kind, how many staff you would need to realize it. But that's how it was. And I want to, in order I don't forget, Monica reminded me that those artists who did an installation, be they from Vienna or from somewhere else, they got a fee, which was not bad in those times. It was 5,000 shillings, which is not even bad today. Even today, an artist would like to get 400 euros if he or she installs a work.
In 85?
In 85,
wow.
Yes. 5,000 shillings. Those artists who made installations, for example, Brigitte Kovans, who, maybe another remark, because you said 98%, there were some couples to whom were also allowed to participate, the partners.
Silvia, just one question, because I think it's not quite correct, if I'm not mistaken, that you had both floors completely to yourself for Kunst mit Eigen-Sinn, because there was something in the building on the upstairs floor that you could not get rid of during the time. Could you mention that?
Yeah, I forgot. I had it even, I had noted it. Yes, this front part of the upper floor was not available because there were two huge artworks by Klaus Oldenburg, the Reagan Wing and the Maus Museum. But this is something we took for granted, yeah. We did not mind.
You worked around elegantly.
Yes, yes.
I mean, there is different ways of censorship, right? There is an institutional one, there is a political one, but there is also like a social one coming really from people who are being scared, as you mentioned towards the end, also with the reviews that you have gotten for your show. And I would be interested and how far you had to deal with censorship.
I think the only thing that we couldn't show was, I'm trying to think, so there's a Cozy Fanny Tutti magazine action, so one of her pornographic works, where she is in a porn magazine, and it's in the collection, so Tate love it, and the only reason I couldn't show it was because when your institution normally shows it, you have to be able to have a choice of whether you can see it or not, and I had no space, so I couldn't build a wall that gave you choice. And so I spoke to Cozy and we agreed to show a different work instead, because it wasn't so, I felt that wasn't censorship because Tate already owns the work and is committed to it. Yeah, we were lucky.
Then you also had a painting in your show that had been censored, right?
Oh,
all the way
loads.
through.
Yeah, loads. Yes. So, sorry, yes. Yeah, Monica Shu, we didn't show God Giving Birth, because the kind of iconic 68 painting, because it was in another brilliant show by Amy Tobin and Amy Budd at Kettle's Yard. But that, when it was shown in St. Ives in 1968, the mayor of St. Ives got very angry and protested at the exhibition. And Monica said she would never work on her own again. She would only work with collectives of women. Two other notable works, Margaret Harrison, she made a series of drawings that make fun of sexist advertising in 1973. So there's a drawing of Playboy Bunny, like Hugh Hefner as a Playboy Bunny, and kind of salacious women, all drawings, all exquisite. The police went to the opening and shut down the show, and later stole a work, the Hugh Hefner one. And when I say shut down the show, it didn't open again. You know, it was aggressive, like they shut it down. And the same with Penny Slinger. So she made a show at a gallery called Flowers in London, where she was making fun of the institution of marriage and of being a bride. And the works are they're suggestive, but they're collages. So if there are body parts that look like they're on display, there are images in front of them. So there's nothing extreme. And again, the police came in and they shut down the exhibition, and she ended up leaving the country fairly soon after, because she was like, I can't work here. You know, it's not that. So yes, lots of censorship.
In Kunst mit Eigen-Sinn, there was no censorship. Vienna has had it longer before, and the hatred and all that also VALIE EXPORT experienced from the yellow press and so on. Kunst mit Eigen-Sinn, there was no censorship.
hinten an der Bar. An der Bar? Ihr seid eingeladen. Ich komme dann, stellt mir das nicht. Geht das nicht, ebenso.